CNN's Chris Cuomo, he's got to be the thickest guy on cable TV. And that's saying a lot. There are a lot of thick people on cable TV. And I don't mean that as in like the rap sexy thick. I mean like dumb. Chris Cuomo was criticizing President Trump's drinking technique. Like, this is what we've come to now. So President Trump, during a speech, he reaches over and he picks up his glass of water, and he does it in a weird way. He doesn't just pick up the glass and drink it. He takes it with both hands, kind of sips it, and then puts it back down. And this turns into a 4-minute segment on CNN.
The president reached for a glass of water during his national security speech, and Twitter took note. It has led to comparisons of how the president needs to use 2 hands, apparently, to drink from a water bottle. He did that during the speech last month and then again yesterday. The Waterworks with the president started with the campaign, of course, when he poked fun at Senator Marco Rubio for pausing mid-sentence for some water. But this was an even smaller glass yesterday where he used 2 hands. I believe last time you called it the baby grip.
Well, that is the sippy cup grip that you're using there right now. It is a very good one. I don't get all the hands thing in the glass. You know, I don't know what it's all about. I mean,
you drink from a vase.
This is what I drink out of. I drink out of them, and I hold it like a man with one hand. But that's me.
Right, that's you.
And I don't think it's a judgment. Certainly not one of our biggest concerns. You want to hold a cup with all your hands, that's what you do.
What a genius he is. The sippy cup grip. So and then you wonder why Trump says fake news all the time. This is why Trump says fake news. Not because it's fake, that's a weird way to grip a cup, but because, like, why is this on the news at all? Like, Twitter is a funny place, and there's lots of funny stuff on Twitter. I engage in it on a regular basis, but I'm not really certain that this is appropriate CNN commentary. Okay, finally, let's do a little bit of Bible talk. So there's a lot of talk from the left today about how it is unbiblical. It is just terrible that we are not talking about centralizing government. Centralized government is dedicated, like God wants government to create the tendency for fairness. So this is a section from the book of Judges. I believe it's chapter 8 of the book of Judges, and talks about the rule of Gideon. So Gideon was, of course, a prophet in Israel, and he leads his men in a fight against the Philistines and other groups that are oppressing the Israelites. And here's what it says. It says, "Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, 'Rule over us, both you and your son, also your son's son, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian.' And Gideon said to them, 'I shall not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you.'" Right, which is a pretty astonishing statement. The Bible is, at best, ambivalent about monarchy, like really ambivalent about monarchy. Moses warns that it's not going to be good. Shmuel warns in 1 Samuel, 1 Samuel. We call it Shmuel Aleph in Hebrew, which is why I hesitate on the English translation. In Shmuel Aleph, Samuel gives an entire lecture to the people about why it's going to suck once they appoint a king. And you have this in the book of Judges where Gideon says, rule yourselves, basically. Don't have a centralized government that rules over you. The idea of a theocratic government that is centralized from the very top is not really well spelled out in the Old Testament at all, and it's not spelled out well in the New Testament either. I mean, the idea of render unto Caesar in the New Testament is very much reflective of the basic Jewish idea of dina de malchus dina, which literally means the law of the land is the law. And that insofar as it doesn't conflict with the law of God, you have to obey it. What's fascinating about this section with regard to Gideon is not just that he says that he's not going to rule over the people, that they have to rule themselves, that God is going to rule over them. He says, "I would make a request of you that you give me every man the nose ring of his spoil, for they had golden nose rings because they were Ishmaelites." And they said, "We shall willingly give." And they spread out the garment, and every man therein threw the nose ring of his spoil. And then Gideon takes all of these rings, and then he makes an ephod, which is a breastplate, and he sets it up in his home city. And it says, "And all Israel went astray after it there, and it became a snare to Gideon into his house." The importance of this, the reason this matters, is when a group of people decide to collectively pool their labor and make something, you have to be very careful they don't begin to worship the thing that they make. And this is true of the American government. We're very proud of our government. We're very proud of our system of government. We're proud of Washington, D.C., the big buildings and how pretty it is and all this. But it's very easy for us to start worshiping the thing that we have made with our own hands and to suggest that it has some sort of outsized power, even though we are the ones that made it. And to suggest that people in the future need to throw their nose rings into the pot as well. That's not the way the American government was meant to be built. It's not the way that it even was in the Bible. There's a reason the Bible says that this becomes a snare to the leaders. It becomes a snare to the people. Collective action must be taken from time to time, but the key there is from time to time. Okay, we'll be back here tomorrow with more notes on all the fallout. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. The Ben Shapiro Show is produced by Mathis Glover, executive producer Jeremy Boring, senior producer Jonathan Hay. Our technical producer is Austin Stevens, edited by Alex Zingaro. Audio is mixed by Mike Cormina. Hair and makeup is by Jesua Olvera. The Ben Shapiro Show is a Daily Wire, copyright Ford Publishing 2017. So the left is really insistent, for the party of science that thinks you can drop rocks from the moon and they will actually destroy the earth, that party of science also doesn't seem to understand that men are men and women are women, and they can't magically change sex. So Ben Ferguson, who's a talk show host in the middle of the country, he was on CNN with Chris Cuomo, and he was talking about this case in Texas that we talked about earlier in the week, in which this girl who is on steroids, I mean, she's on testosterone, she wrestled a bunch of other girls in the Texas high school wrestling championships, and she won. Because it turns out that girls on steroids are able to outcompete other girls. And this has been a problem ever since the East Germans used to drug up their women for swimming, and then they'd win all the medals, and then it would come out later that they were all drugged up. This has been a problem for a long time. Chris Cuomo, however, on CNN, who is thick as a block of wood, cannot understand why anyone would have objections to any of this.
The irony is that if there were acceptance, we wouldn't have had this issue because this kid would be wrestling against boys. But just so we know, and for those as you're learning about this issue.
But even then, though, here's...
Let me just so people know.
Here's the thing.
Well, hold on, Ben.
Sure.
Let's just clarify one thing. The science you have to be very careful about, okay?
But to say that we should change the entire way that sports is done because of one person and their decision to do something, that is unrealistic.
But the premise is flawed because the logic requires you to believe that of course you do. That's why we're having the discussion. That transgender doesn't count. But it does count, and that's why we're having this bigger debate about what you allow transgender kids to have access to and what you don't.
That if you are born a boy, that you use the boys' restroom / locker room.
But what if you identify as a girl?
You go in.
But you're you're simplifying the idea of gender and sex. Look, we've heard this. This is not a novel concept.
Chris,
we have the Fourth Circuit.
Chris,
the Fourth Circuit just said what I'm saying.
Okay, and the Fourth Circuit is wrong because this is silly. Okay, the fact is this. If you're going to separate gender from sex, and you're just going to say that what gender is however you feel in your head, then there aren't two genders, right? There's no transgenders. There's not two genders. There's not 50 genders, as Facebook would have you believe. There are infinite numbers of genders, right? Because I am Ben-gendered, right? In my head, my gender is exactly what I say it is. And in your head, you have the number of genders that you say you have. The fact is that if you want to make gender so specific that it's just what's going on in your mind, then why box it into a various series of categories? Why not instead just say that you are, Bob gendered or military or Millie gendered, right? You have your own gender. The problem is once you separate off biology and gender, then you end up in this la-la land where basically we just say, okay, fine, we'll treat you as individuals with regard to your quote-unquote gender, but your sex is still the governing body. And that's the problem the left can't deal with. So instead what they try to do is they try to create this tenuous linkage between sex and gender, even though gender is basically a made-up term. Sex is sex. End of story. They've tried to basically say that you can have a female brain in a male body. There's no evidence of that. The scientific studies that try and make claims about neurological density between transgender men and transgender women being similar to the sex they claim membership to, those studies are very, very small in sample size. They typically survey like 7 or 8 people who are transgender. They're self-selected, so you don't actually have a good basis for comparison. Really what you'd want to do is sample 1,000 women and then see if all the women who had the most neurological density in certain parts of their brain, were all those women transgender? If the answer is yes, then maybe you have something. If the answer is no, then there's no correlation even. So these studies are really poorly done. They don't hold up under scrutiny. The fact is this. We just don't know that much about how the human brain works. And I would assume that if you are transgender and if you have some sort of mental disorder, that there is a biological basis for the mental disorder. Nobody's claiming that it's you're faking it or that you're choosing to be this thing. But that doesn't change the fact that your sex is your sex, and your sex is chromosomally determined. It is biologically determined. Chris Cuomo pretending he doesn't understand that. Maybe he doesn't understand it. Maybe he's just that dumb.